On a crowded spring night in Columbus, Ohio, the music was loud, the drinks were flowing, and the city felt alive. Inside a busy bar near the Ohio State University campus, hundreds of people moved in and out without a second thought. Among them was a 27-year-old medical student, smiling, relaxed, and looking forward to a short break from the pressures of school. By the end of the night, he would be gone. No struggle. No clear exit. No trace. And somehow, no one would ever see him leave. Brian Shaffer was, by all accounts, a typical young man with a promising future. He was a second-year medical student at Ohio State University, known for his intelligence, sense of humor, and easygoing personality. Friends described him as sociable and well-liked, someone who could blend into almost any crowd. But beneath the surface, Brian had been carrying emotional weight. Just weeks earlier, his mother had died after a battle with cancer. The loss had shaken him deeply. Those close to him said he tried to stay strong, leaning on friends and family while continuing his studies. On the evening of March 31, 2006, Brian decided to go out. It was meant to be a normal night, an opportunity to unwind before a planned vacation to Miami with his girlfriend. He met up with his friend William Clint Florence, and the two began bar hopping in Columbus' bustling nightlife district. As the night progressed, they made their way to a bar called the Ugly Tuna Se Leona, located inside a complex known as the South Campus Gateway. It was a popular spot, packed with students and weekend crowds. Security cameras positioned at the entrance captured Brian and Clint arriving around 1:15 a.m. Brian appeared relaxed, even stopping to talk briefly with two women near the escalator. There was nothing unusual about his behavior. Nothing to suggest what was about to happen. Inside, the night continued like any other. Music, conversation, drinks. At some point, Clint left the bar, briefly stepping outside. Brian remained inside. Then, sometime after 2 a.m., the bar began to close. Crowds filtered out through the main entrance, passing directly under the surveillance camera that had recorded Brian entering earlier that night. Dozens of faces were captured, laughing, tired, intoxicated, each one leaving the bar and disappearing into the night. But Brian was not among them. Investigators would later review the footage repeatedly. Frame by frame. Minute by minute. Every person who entered after Brian was eventually seen leaving. Except Brian Shaffer. At first, his absence wasn't immediately alarming. It was a late night, and people often split up or changed plans. Clint assumed Brian had left with someone else or headed home on his own. But as hours turned into a full day, concern began to grow. Brian missed calls. He didn't return home. Most troubling, he failed to show up for his scheduled flight to Miami later that morning. That was when the situation shifted from unusual to urgent. Brian was officially reported missing. Columbus police quickly launched an investigation, focusing on the last confirmed location, the Ugly Tuna Se Leona. The surveillance footage became the centerpiece of the case. The camera coverage was considered strong. Positioned at the main entrance, it captured nearly everyone entering and exiting the bar. Investigators carefully analyzed hours of footage, identifying patrons and tracking movements. Brian could be clearly seen entering, but there was no definitive footage of him leaving. This created a chilling possibility. Somehow, Brian had either left through an unmonitored exit or never left the building at all. Detectives explored the layout of the bar and surrounding complex. While the main entrance was covered by cameras, there were service exits and restricted access areas that were not directly monitored. Employees and band members sometimes used these routes. In theory, Brian could have slipped out through one of these alternative paths. But there was no evidence confirming it. No witness reported seeing him leave that way. No camera picked up his movement beyond the main floor. And no physical trace, no dropped items, no signs of struggle, was ever found inside the building. As days turned into weeks, investigators broadened their search. They interviewed friends, bar staff, and anyone who had been in contact with Brian that night. The two women he had spoken to near the entrance were identified and questioned. They provided no indication of anything suspicious. Their interaction with Brian had been brief and casual. Clint Florence cooperated fully with police and was never considered a suspect. His account remained consistent, and there was no evidence tying him to any wrongdoing. Brian's phone records were also examined. Shortly after the bar closed, his phone appeared to briefly connect to a cell tower before going silent. It was a small detail, but it suggested that, at some point, his phone, and possibly Brian himself, had moved outside the bar. Even so, the trail ended there. No further pings. No calls. No activity. The investigation faced a growing problem, a complete lack of physical evidence. There was no body. No confirmed crime scene. No signs of violence. Without these, every theory remained speculation. Some investigators considered the possibility that Brian had left the bar unnoticed and encountered foul play elsewhere. The area surrounding the Gateway complex included alleys, parking structures, and construction zones at the time. It was possible he had crossed paths with the wrong person. Others suggested a voluntary disappearance. Brian had been under emotional strain following his mother's death. Could he have chosen to walk away from his life? But those closest to him strongly rejected that idea. He had plans. He had a future in medicine. He had a relationship he was committed to. And he had shown no signs of wanting to disappear. Another theory pointed to an accidental death, perhaps a fall or an incident that went unnoticed in a hidden area. Extensive searches were conducted, but nothing was ever found to support it. Years passed, and the case remained open. Investigators revisited the footage, re-interviewed witnesses, and followed up on tips. Occasionally, new leads would emerge, but none led to answers. Brian's disappearance became one of the most perplexing missing person cases in modern American history. It stood out not because of what was known, but because of what wasn't. A man enters a crowded bar. He is seen clearly. He is surrounded by people, lights, cameras. And then, without explanation, he is gone. Today, the disappearance of Brian Shaffer remains unsolved. There are no confirmed sightings. No definitive evidence of what happened after that night. His case continues to be investigated, but with each passing year, the silence grows heavier. For his family and friends, the absence is constant. There is no closure, only questions that have never been answered. Somewhere between the entrance and the exit of a crowded bar, Brian's story simply stops. And in that gap, a mystery endures, quiet, unresolved, and deeply unsettling. Thanks for watching. Follow for more intriguing stories.